Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Harlem Fine Arts Show 2021. My name is Dr. Myrah Brown Greene, and I am here with photographer extraordinaire Vanessa Greene. How are you?
Myra, I'm great, and I'm just so thrilled to be a part of the Harlem Fine Arts Show.
Yeah, we're so happy to have you. So, how did you get started as a photographer?
My dad, my dad, when I was very young, was the NCO in charge of the Army Pictorial Center.
Mm,
He had been involved in photography his whole life. He even built a camera when he was 12 years old.
wow.
And I think that happened after he had his portrait taken here in New York when he was visiting his Uncle Pete. And that just ignited his interest in photography. And so my brother and I have been taking photographs for years. Um, I
Wow.
have a picture that I love that is me at 3 years old behind my father's speed graphic camera. And it's kind of immortalized and dated my entry into photography at three
Oh, how
years old.
cool. That's so wonderful.
Yeah.
So you are located in South Carolina now,
I'm in South Carolina now.
but I know you've traveled all over the world with your father as an, what would we call you
An
when you were
army
little?
brat.
Yes, wanted to make
Yeah.
sure. So what was that like?
Um, Most of the time it was great. Sometimes it was painful, Myra. I remember I went to elementary school in New York City until I think it was fifth grade. And then we moved in the middle of fifth grade to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, where I believe I was one of very, very few, if not the only Black girl in my grade.
Wow.
Um, I began to learn how racism feels. Like nobody wants to hold your hand. And I can remember living on base. We were stationed at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and my cousin was visiting from South Carolina, and my two neighbor friends down the street, two young white girls, were at my house. And all of a sudden, the younger girl spit in my cousin's face and called her a nigger. It was stunning. I think I was probably 10 years old. And my mom sent them home, and we were told not to play with them anymore. So, I had things like that happen to me as I was growing up in the military, one of very, very few African American kids in school.
Wow.
Yeah.
So traveling from place to place, how did that inspire your photography and where did you first really end up um, and focus on?
Photography.
Yes.
So, um, my dad bought me and my brother cameras when we were really young. And if you look at pictures taken of us, from age what 5 to 6 to 7, they're always pictures with us and a camera around our shoulder or our neck, right? There's a picture of my brother and me on a Staten Island ferry. We were little kids, but we always had our cameras with us. So we were introduced to photography at a very young age. We're always snapping photographs. I think it became real for us, for my brother and me in particular, when we moved to the Panama Canal Zone. I
Mm.
was a freshman in high school, and we had a darkroom facility on the base. And since there's not a lot to do on the base, my brother and I spent a lot of time in the dark room that was made available to us. And that's when the potential of photography really started to come alive for my brother and me. Seeing that image manifest, in this liquid in the dark room is just the most wonderful feeling and experience. Um, my dad was always largely into black and white photography. And I guess being daddy's girl, so was I. And my father was, I would consider him a documentary photography. And
Mm,
so was I. And I wanted to be like Gordon Parks. I mean, Gordon Parks was really in his heyday when I was in high school. And you know how you sit down with your parents and you have the talk about college?
mm.
Well, my father pulled me aside one evening and said, "Well, honey, let's talk about college." I said, "Well, Dad, I don't really want to go to college. I want to be a photographer like you and Gordon Parks, and I want to travel the world." And my father just took a deep breath and said, "Oh, okay, honey, let's sit down and talk about this." He said, "You can be a photographer, there's no problem there, but I do want you to go to college first. And then if you still want to be a photographer, you certainly can do that." So I've always loved the process of developing, film and posing people and capturing events on camera. I mean, I have pictures that I took of my playmates um, from elementary school and so forth, playing on the jungle gym, and it was just something I truly loved. And I think in part it was because of it was something that my dad and I could do together, and I admired him greatly. So I think that had a lot to do with it. But that passion for photography took me all the way through high school. I was a photographer for the newspaper, and
Wow.
when I went to college, we published a publication called Our Little Black Book. So I did photography all through my college years. So I was never without a camera, and
Wow.
always a Canon.
Nice,
Always a Canon.
nice.
I'll tell you a funny story. I came home one time from college,
Mhm.
and my father had bought a new camera. It was a Nikon. It was as if he had divorced my mother. I mean, it was just, that was, just how attached I was to my dad and photography and our history with Canon cameras. So and I suspect there are a lot of women out there who kind of developed in the same way. I know a few, in fact. So
Wow. So you end up going to college, you end up with an MBA. You're still into the photography thing. You still have this passion for it, and you're still looking at um, things, people, places, and things that you want to capture.
yeah,
So, and then you end up in Mississippi. How does that happen?
I was working for a foundation, giving
Mhm.
money away. Right out of college, I went to work for a foundation called the Youth Project, and I traveled. I was making grants throughout the South, and so my boss at the time didn't like to travel, so she sent me everywhere. And I spent quite a bit of time in Mississippi, and there was just something about the development going on in Mississippi. People with this can-do attitude, living in very stark and underserved conditions,
Mhm.
taking their lives in their own hands and building communities and building businesses. And I loved the idea of making tangible social change. And so I eventually went to live and work in Mississippi,
Mhm.
and got involved in a lot of activity there, including the founding of the Mississippi Delta Blues Festivals.
Wow.
Yeah, that was wonderful. It was wonderful.
So, for those of you out there in virtual land, Vanessa Greene has a gallery space on the Harlem Fine Arts Show site, which we're really excited about. Um, and there's one photograph that we can look at, and we'll get a little preview of a little girl sitting at a table and just it's almost like you all made this eye contact that was just like you all were looking at each other's souls.
You know, Myra, like a lot of photographers, particularly photographers who shoot film, I don't always process my film right away.
Hmm.
And maybe 2 or 3 years after I'd taken that photograph, I processed it. And there is this little girl in Mississippi looking me straight in the eye, confidently. And I fell in love with her and with, that photograph. It was just amazing. And I think it's one of um, the shots that I'm most fond of. I photographed demonstrations in Mississippi. I photographed boycotts. I photographed the construction and development of new communities and towns. But it's always been about people for me. It's really been about documenting people in their environment. And that little girl just, I mean, I love that photograph. And there are times when I'd like to find her. She's probably what, 40 some years old now or something,
Yeah.
And I often wonder what happened to her.
Yeah, she just looks
Yeah.
so comfortable.
Yes.
You know, it's
And
like
grown
she's
up.
leaning across that chair
Yeah.
and she just looks really comfortable. Like it
Yeah.
was like, I'm not gonna move. I'm just gonna, it was almost like she was asked to pose.
Yeah, like take my picture. Go
Yeah,
ahead, take my
basically.
picture.
Yeah. So, so while you're in Mississippi, you said that you photographed you founded the Mississippi Blues Festival. So I'm sure you did a lot of photography
I
during that
did.
time.
And I was part of a group that started the Mississippi Delta Blues Festivals. I worked very closely with folklorist Worth Long, um, but also one of Worth's best friends um, is and was Roland Freeman.
Hmm.
So I had the opportunity to kind of look over Roland's shoulder, you know,
Nice.
and study his work and
Wow.
his technique. I've always been really shy, and I was rather shy then, but um, but just fell in love with Roland and his work, and in some respects have tried to emulate that through the years. He taught me a sort of an etiquette in how to deal with people. I mean, for example, it would be rare that Roland would photograph someone and not send them a copy of the photograph.
Mm,
I mean, I that he just really respects his subjects that much.
mm,
Unlike other photographers who are basically self-centered and never think about the person they're documenting or photographing. So, there were little things like that I really enjoyed learning from Roland.
yeah, I mean, even the title of his book, Communion
A
of the
communion of
Spirit.
spirits. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I think that that was just, I mean, that says a lot about him. I mean, he was also, I'm a quilt maker. He was also in the quilt making scene. You know, he loved photographing women and
yes,
men who were quilters.
yes,
And he just traveled all over the country
absolutely.
doing that and just
Yeah,
getting really intimate in their
yes,
space, so that their spirits, you know,
yeah,
would connect, and you could see it in his photography.
absolutely. And he visited us here in South Carolina.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, my dad introduced him to several quilt makers that we know, or that he knew. And so that was a big deal for my family to have the famous Roland. My daughter knows Roland Freeman, the famous Roland Freeman, come and stay at our house and
Wow.
photograph our friends and neighbors. So that was a real treat for us. Yeah.
So did you get to photograph any projects with your dad?
Um, I'm trying to think. No, my dad, when he retired from the military, he did some photography, but he basically was there to guide my brother and me. Um, at one point, I moved to South Carolina and I became like a wedding photographer,
Mm,
which I photograph weddings like I would a documentary event. So, I started doing a lot of weddings, church events. Um, I started shooting color because prior to that, it was largely black and white.
mhm.
But I think I was a really great documentary wedding photographer. I think people liked the way that I mapped out a wedding so that it told a story,
Oh,
and
nice.
so that made and it's interesting because I'm still in touch with some of those couples whose weddings I photographed, and now they have children, and so that makes it a lot of fun.
So let's go back to Mississippi for a minute. Um, when you began to really photograph portraits there, even though it was social documentary, um, what things did you hear in your ear from your dad? You know how we get these there's this like voice that we hear
Oh, sure.
from our parents of things that we learned and or that they taught us or they told us not to do. What kinds of things did you hear as far as photography that you used in your work?
So one thing, Myra, that I learned, or that my father would say, and I've never forgotten, is that when you take a photograph, if you have to describe it, then you haven't done your job. My
Mm,
father and a lot of photographers back in the day believed that you catch and you tell the story in the viewfinder.
mhm,
And so that's, my father had these incredible standards, right? And he would tell me, you kind of missed the mark here. I don't know what's going on. What story are you trying to tell? So that
wow.
was one of the things that and it sort of kind of made me for a while a very insecure photographer. I mean,
Really?
yeah,
How?
because I was always trying to measure up to my dad,
Mhm.
and I just developed some very unrealistic expectations, and I was still doing photography the old way. Photography is constantly evolving,
Mhm.
and and artistic expression and photographic expression looks a lot different now than it looked back when Gordon Parks was shooting. I mean, Gordon Parks is always going to be relevant, and my dad's pictures will always be relevant. But we have different ways of looking at the world and interpreting what we see nowadays. And so I think I've moved away from that. And I think that, I've come into my own as a photographer now.
Wow. That's so amazing that you would, and I guess we all do that, where you would bring forward your dad, um, in really in your work, um, because I think that when we are working, a lot of times, I mean, we definitely, like you said, we definitely don't want to disappoint them. Um, and it's only because like you hear like certain things that they've said, like better
Yeah,
or you can do better. Or like you said, show me what you can do, or what does the story mean?
yeah.
So hanging your work in the Harlem Fine Arts Gallery space, was it like revisiting these experiences?
So yes, um, but it has also helped me to understand how I have grown and evolved as an artist.
Nice.
And you know, but I've also am working rather thematically right now. So COVID, I'm in South Carolina now, permanently a permanent resident. I live in a little coastal town called Georgetown, South Carolina.
Mhm.
In Myrah, I live 2 blocks from where the first enslaved Africans entered the New World, 2 blocks away in Winyard Bay.
Wow.
And I live in a place where the first African American congressman was born here in Georgetown and lived a few blocks from where I'm currently residing.
Wow.
I live in a town where the first African American First Lady, Michelle Obama's people, are from Fenfield Plantation, which is here in Georgetown County.
Mm.
So God has really blessed this community I live in with this incredibly rich history.
Oh my goodness.
And so my work today is endowed with a sense of responsibility.
Okay.
And I feel even more responsible for documenting the history of this region in a way, and getting it out in a way that people all over the world understand the significance of events that happened here.
I love that. I love that, Vanessa. So we're going to take a quick break and we will be right back. Stay
Great.
tuned. Welcome back, everyone. And for those of you who are just joining us, I'm here with the magnificent Vanessa Greene, photographer. My name is Dr. Myra Brown Greene, and you are definitely enjoying the Harlem Fine Arts show Fireside Chat. So, Vanessa, I know that you lived in New York City for a good period of time. Um, and then you, well, before you moved back to South Carolina, right?
Yes.
But you started traveling. What was that like?
It was so it was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
My dad planned he planned all of this.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted his children to be able to see the world. So we left New York at a very early age, uh, in the 60s, moved to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, where I can remember so clearly, Myra, there was this huge billboard that said, "The KKK welcomes you to Fayetteville." you know?
Wow.
Yeah. And so we lived
Did your
on,
father get a photograph of that?
no, but if you Google it, you can see. I mean, I Googled it to make sure I was remembering correctly. And I'm
Wow.
sure I say no, but I'm sure we've got a photograph of that somewhere in our
Mm-hmm.
archives,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But so after Fort Bragg, my dad went to Vietnam. We moved to Chicago. We lived at Fort Devens, Massachusetts. And then we finished up my dad's military career in the Panama Canal Zone. And, my camera, interestingly enough, Myra, my camera became even more important to me the older I became because I grew up really lonely as a lonely kid. There were not very many African Americans in my school when I was living on base. So, for example, when I lived in Fort Devens, Massachusetts, there may have been 3 or 4 African American kids in my grade
Mm-hmm.
um, out of several hundred. When I graduated high school in the Panama Canal Zone, there were 400 graduates, and 4 of us were African American. So
Wow.
I had friends, but I was also kind of lonely. And so, my parents made sure that we had lots to entertain ourselves with, and I had my photography, and so I, I didn't go to dances, Myra, but I did go to dance. I didn't have a date, but I had my camera, so I would go to the dances and take pictures and so forth. So
Wow.
that that was the downside of growing up in the military during that period.
Mm.
Um, and then I went to college, and life became more interesting for me. Okay.
Right.
But yeah, it was strange having so few African American friends. I had a lot of Latina and Latino friends, but not very many African American friends from my junior high or from high school.
Wow. So you end up traveling to Cuba of all places. I'm trying to remember when I met you at the Javits, right? I think it
Yes, I
was
was. Yes, I just moved to New York.
really
Yes, I hadn't long moved to New York, and you were
interesting.
exhibiting. There was a course.
Yes, I was in an exhibit there because
Right.
I had done the Puck Building a couple of times, and then I went to the Javits to try that
Yes.
out.
Yeah, but and you weren't at your booth. I was at your booth, and I asked a person in the vicinity, "Whose booth is this?" Because I fell in love with your quilt, and I
Wow.
started photographing your quilt. And then I swung back by, and there you were. And I think that picture of you was really great.
Oh, I love that picture. I do.
So,
That you took of me that you sent to me. I
yeah,
use it as my,
but we
as,
didn't become friends until years later.
yeah, I'm telling,
Years later.
yeah, and I got a phone call. I was at City College and
Yes.
yes, and we ended up, you ended
Yeah.
up giving me a call and it was like the
Yes.
day after I was gonna be leaving the institution. And I remember, having
Yeah.
this conversation with you saying, "Oh, I hope you don't think I'm crazy, but I have to just vent." And it
I
was
think we both did some venting that day.
right. Yeah. And you came up, I had curated a public art installation, and you
Oh, and
came,
I still see that a show in my head. I love that
yeah,
show.
you drove all the way from Long Island
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
meet me and to see the exhibition.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
And then, and I'm saying all this to say, I'm trying to lead up to you saying you need to go to Cuba and you
Yeah.
need to put a group together. And I'm like, really? And then I did the first group with you, and to
Yeah.
see this woman in action on these tours is just amazing. And then the next time you didn't come with me, you said you can do this, you can do it, you're ready, you can do it by yourself, and it just became addictive for me. So
Yeah.
when did you decide to go to Cuba?
I always wanted to go to Cuba, but I either didn't have the money or I didn't have the time. But
Hmm.
then in 2010, I think it was, my friend Rosie Gordon Wallace, who is the founder and director of Diaspora Vibe in Miami,
Hmm.
called and said, "V, I'm going to Cuba. You should come with me." And so I'm like, yes, yes. The time was right. I had a little money to spend, and everything changed. I mean, Cuba just, you know, Myra, when I say everything changed, I was a typical New Yorker by that time, right? And my whole wardrobe was black, black and maybe a little white.
Hmm.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
But after Cuba, and my photography was still largely black and white.
Wow.
After Cuba, everything changed. My
Yeah.
wardrobe changed and my photography changed. I mean, I still love black and white, but Cuba was begging for color.
Oh, no doubt, no doubt. Oh my
Yeah,
goodness. And
yeah,
I'm telling you, the folks that wore white, which really were either the Yawos or the priests, in the Santeria or Yoruba tradition,
yes,
um, that white was almost like, how can I put it? It just made everything else pop
yeah,
around it. So you
yeah,
still went back to the color because even though they had the white on, and I loved wearing white, they had the beautiful colored beads, which
yes,
were, and the alekes, their traditional beads were just so beautifully made, which was
yes,
really interesting.
yeah,
So, photographing there, because I loved to photograph Cuba as well. So,
yeah.
what was that like for you? Like, how was it different from Mississippi?
Well, I think so. I started shooting color, but just because you shoot color doesn't mean that you don't have content, right?
Right.
So I just I I really started studying and learning about the Cuban culture.
Hmm.
And so I have, over the time I've been working in Cuba, traveling in Cuba, I want to be able to read what's going on.
Hmm.
Okay. So I'm not just aimlessly shooting, right?
Hmm.
I'm actually capturing stories that I can interpret. And so that was the difference in with the Cuba work. I mean, I really had to spend a lot of time knowing people, knowing the customs. One of the things that was such a blessing for me
Hmm.
with the frequency of my travel, I really came to know a lot of people, very intimately in Cuba.
Hmm.
So what that means is I was invited into people's homes. I was invited to have meals with Cuban families. And so the photography I've been able to do has a degree of intimacy that not everyone can capture in Cuba. And so I consider that a real blessing. In fact, there are some photographs that are really, really personal, you know, and I think I would probably need to get permission from my Cuban friends to actually exhibit those images. Um, but as you know, the Cuban people are very open, and you respect them, they respect you. And that intimacy happens where, you see them as they are. They talk candidly to you, and they take you into their homes, no matter how modest those homes are.
Oh yeah, no doubt. I mean, the first time I went, um, I went by myself with a group that I put together, and I was surprised that I'm like, I'm not going to get a group. And then people just started saying, "Oh, I want to go with you. I want to go with you. I want to go with you." And I realized that once I went, I was able to put my art history into practice, really,
Yes,
and I knew more about the culture than I thought I would have known. And I remember my husband's mom used to always talk about them having cousins there, first cousins.
yes,
And I just really felt like I just had to go. I'd been to Africa, and I said, and this was another point of entry for captives coming in from Africa. And I had to go. And then when I went back with photographs, my husband had to come the next time I went, and he was able to find his first cousins, which was really
yes, yes. I remember
emotional.
that. Yeah,
It was
I
super,
remember
super
that.
emotional.
Yeah.
But there's a photograph that you have in your gallery space that I believe it's kind of personal. Um, because you catch this really emotional moment, and it's this elder. She's pointing at this young woman who has this look on her face like she does not want to disrespect her elder, but something has been said to her. Maybe she didn't do something, a chore or whatever, and she doesn't look that young.
No.
Um, so what was that like capturing that particular photograph? And then it's so colorful, a lot of reds, and
So
then yeah.
so Myra, it's interesting because there are photographs that I don't exhibit because they're so personal. You know what I
Mhm,
mean? And
mhm, mhm.
I have caught people in an off guard moment, and I prefer to ask their permission to exhibit the photograph than to just. I mean, I try to be very respectful of the people that I photographed. Um, this photograph, because it was a very public space, it it it, it touches my heart because if you remember, there's kind of this wistfulness look on the young girl's face.
Mhm.
Um, like, just really wanting to change her life, to leave, to be different, to actualize her dreams. Eh, and I- it was a while before I exhibited that photograph. In fact, I had to decide if it was too personal because the people that I photograph are not just anonymous individuals. They're
Mhm.
people, because I travel to Cuba a lot,
Right.
people who, they become our friends, right?
Hmm.
And, they give us access to them, but we have to be very sensitive and maybe even censor our own work,
Right.
um, because we don't want to exploit them and their situation. I mean, there are many photographs I've taken, at the home of friends, that the general public may never see, because there's just too much. They're too personal,
Yeah.
or they may be too painful.
Yeah.
Um, and so, and I want, and the other thing, it's when we were in Cuba, I know that you do, and I certainly do. Taking a photograph of a group from a distance, or a person from a distance, is one thing, but taking a photograph with someone right in your face, I mean, I'm very careful about photographing children, um,
That's
and
right.
because without their parents' permission.
Hmm.
If they were performing or out in the open public space, that's one thing. But I remember taking pictures of an adorable little girl who was in a daycare center. And all the kids were laying on their cots and they were supposed to be taking a nap. But she was leaning on her hands like this and waving. And I've never shown that to anyone because, she's a child, and I didn't get her parents' permission to show. So
Right.
I'm more careful about those things in Cuba than I am, oftentimes in other places.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and I get it. I honestly do. So we're gonna take one more break,
Okay.
and we will be right back.
Fantastic.
So welcome back, everyone. Thank you again, Vanessa, for being here. This has been so exciting just to hear your story. And I'm really, really excited to go back into your gallery space on the Harlem Fine Arts Show
Thank you,
website.
Myrah. Yeah.
Yes. So we are in Mississippi with basically black and white photography. Then you start to travel to Cuba, where color hits you like something that has never hit you before.
Yeah.
And now you are currently creating these phenomenal montages, which we'll see, which combines the black and white imagery with color. And it happens to be your ancestry that you're doing this with. Tell us a bit about that.
So, Myra, this is for me. This is just this is a phase of my photographic development that is so much fun. I mean, using the technology to manipulate the photographic images is a challenge, but it's also really exciting.
Mhm, mhm.
So, I mentioned that, I live here in South Carolina, and both my parents are from here. And, there in particular is a plantation where my folks, my father's people are from. And my father's family has always talked about Nightingale Plantation. And I'll never forget the day he actually drove me up to the gates of the plantation. And it said Nightingale. This was some place that I had heard about, my whole life. And so there have been times when I imagine my people on Nightingale Plantation,
Mm,
living, working, um, but then having their own space after the quote, quote, white day is done, um, and loving each other and celebrating each other. And so I've begun this series. It's called the Nightingale series, where with the wonders of Photoshop and Lightroom, I am able to create these montages
nice,
that layer images of my family members and other um, African Americans of that period unknown, to layer them and integrate them into Nightingale, and to begin infusing these images with color,
nice,
and make, cowrie shells, making that connection between Africa and this quote unquote new world of the enslaved. And that has been a wonderful, I mean, I just, it, and I have to tell you honestly, because I was so much my father's daughter,
hmm,
it took me a minute before I was able to manipulate these images. And it was almost as if I was defacing them, And
wow.
now,
I get it though. I do.
yeah, I have embraced this new technology, and am creating, new expressive work that I'm very, very excited about. Um, you know,
Yeah, I know. I'm laughing because I'm working on some of my quilts. I interviewed someone um, a couple of weeks ago, and she was wearing this beautiful dress,
yeah,
and she said it was her pattern. She had printed on it or designed it. And she says, well, this will probably end up in one of my paintings in the next, you know, year or so. And I said, what? To myself. So I get where you're coming from. And I said, I started pulling out quilts that I made like 20
Yeah.
years ago that I've only shown maybe once. And I started kind of reimagining them. And the first one I put a, another piece of fabric, like I started layering these fabrics on top of them, and you fuse them. So now once you fuse that first one, it's all done. It's like it's a different piece. So I know what you're talking about when
Yeah.
you said you felt like you were defacing these images. But isn't
Yeah.
that the beauty of it all? It's
Yeah.
like growing. It's like you're growing,
The
you know?
response to the work has been wonderful. Um, a montage of my grandmother, Julia Wyatt, was accepted into our regional, very competitive regional art show last year, and that was thrilling.
I can
And
imagine.
I submitted another piece this year, and so this is a very new experience for me. And Myra, I've even decided to start working three dimensionally. So you'll have to wait and see because my grandfather was among other things a builder. He could build anything,
Mm,
and so I visit a lot of antique shops and thrift stores collecting old tools and saws and things that kind of represent my grandfather, tools of my grandfather's trade. And so I want to create this gigantic mobile, so it's this creative journey is a journey. And I started out as a young child in photography, and photography has just taken me into all of these new dimensions. And it's been really wonderful. It's been absolutely
wow.
wonderful.
Can you tell us a little bit about the 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 little boy and girl that is in the gallery space? It's the are they siblings?
Well, they appear to be siblings. So this photograph is these children are anonymous. Um, and they do appear to be siblings, but they seem to be, if you look at the way they are dressed, I mean, they appear to be somewhat middle class. They don't appear to be rural per se. And I just, I love this photograph because so many of the images of Black children who were born before and after the antebellum period
Mm-hmm.
um, have them in tattered clothing, looking poor, unhappy, downtrodden, and these children are not. And yet the image itself is from the mid 1800s, early 1900s. So I have titled that particular piece Quo Vadis, you know, um, indicating that these are young children who have options and a future far beyond what their parents most likely had. So, you know, I love that particular piece. Um, it's basked in yellows and lots of light
Mm-hmm.
um, because I'm attempting to signal through those means, through those colors, that these are children who have options in the future.
Yeah.
So,
Hmm.
I'm very, very conscious of presenting people with dignity, and I won't deny that a person is impoverished, but I have a series of um, images that were produced in the mid 1800s, early 1900s, where Black people and their deportment is really dignified. And I hope never to present my people in a way that is not dignified.
Yeah, that's important. I think it's so important. I mean, we have been taught that other narrative, like, quite naturally. And so in many instances, it's what we expect,
Yes.
and when you mentioned that you used like yellows, I thought that was just so brilliant because when you think of the 1900s, you think of the color, you think of ochre, and you've updated that color.
Yes.
It still has that feeling of the old, but it's been updated, and you're almost talking about giving the viewer a peek into a possible royal family,
That's right.
you know?
That's right. And and I'll go ahead and give it away, but within every piece of work of this new work, um, I've hidden a tell, a connector, you know, that links us with our very beginnings in
Mm,
Africa, you know, and I really I think of these people in this series as part of a continuum.
nice.
Okay. And we had some things that that we brought here with us when we came from uh, from Africa that remain a part of who we are. And I think that's very important for young people to know, but also adults need to understand and celebrate that fact that we didn't come
Yeah,
as
I think
empty
that
vessels.
is
You know,
so phenomenal. Not to cut across you, but I think
no,
it's so important.
yeah,
Um, and it's so interesting. A lot of folks don't know that you are a writer, and Afrofuturism is one of the
yeah,
um, genres that you write in, which I think is magnificent because the African person, the Black person, the person of color always lives in what it is that you're doing, and
yes.
so I think that that's like super super special.
I I think it's, and I don't know why everybody doesn't get it, but you know when I look at African American history,
Hmm.
I mentioned early on that I lived 2 blocks from where the first enslaved Africans were brought to the New World. When I look at what we have accomplished, it is amazing. Our resilience, our creativity,
Hmm.
you know, all of the talents. I mean, I live in a county that where almost 25% of the rice in the United States was grown because our ancestors, my ancestors, brought that rice over in their hair, in their pockets, and you know, and our labor really helped build this country in a
Hmm.
substantial way. So I celebrate that and I marvel at that. I think it is absolutely amazing what our ancestors were able to do, with my great grandparents and my grandparents were able to do. And so I have used this period of incubating, and trying not to become ill with COVID, to read a lot, and to write and to make art. And what could be better than that? you
Oh
know?
yeah. So thank you, Vanessa, for
Thank you,
being
Myra.
a
Thank
part of
you.
the Harlem Fine Arts Show.
Yes, yes.
Um, you,
Everybody out there, check out Vanessa Greene Photography on the
yes,
Harlem Fine Art Show site.
yes, I'm telling you, you're one of the artists who helps make it better. We have so many great artists, and you're one of them.
Well,
So
thank
we
you,
are
Vanessa.
really thankful that you have signed up and you are participating. So, yes, please go and see those pieces that we've talked about and send Vanessa a message. Um, so, we're really excited to
Well,
have
thank
you.
you. I'm
Thank you.
excited, and
Yeah,
I can't. I mean, this year is phenomenal. I can't wait till next year. So it's
great, great. Thank
thank you
you.
so much.
And thank all of you for being with us. Thank you. We'll see you next time.
Bye
Peace.
bye. Bye bye.
Okay, I'm gonna end it.
Okay.
Let's see. Um, I'll call you. I'll call you.
Okay. Okay.
All right. I'll
Thanks,
talk to you.
Em. Bye
Peace.
bye.
Bye bye.